So obviously the level design is fantastic, and it's really great about funneling you back and making those shortcuts. Maybe, like, I don't know, people are comparing it to Dark Souls, but why does Kratos have to climb onto the chain every time you kick it down?
Dude, I don't know. Here's what I want to know. How come with all of that awesome gear, there's no helmet for Kratos? It just looks odd to have his bald head poking out the whole time.
Definitely weird.
Right. That's why you gave it a 9.
So, all kidding aside, Corey, it's awesome to have you here to chat about God of War. Everyone in the office loves it a whole lot. Kratos and Atreus are obviously super interesting, but what I want to know more about is how you guys leverage Norse mythology. There's a lot of material there. How did you know what to use, what not to use?
Oh, that was a long process. It's the instinct in the beginning that you just want to overload everything. You just want to put everything in. And interestingly, the first script we drafted, I had to pretty much pull the plug on. It was one of the writers that we had working for us, Shane Leesgang, put a lot of heart and soul into that one. And I realized when we were at like a really crude rough draft form that we were writing the second game. That we were suddenly so deep into the mythology that it was taking center stage, and the father-son story was actually getting pushed aside a little bit. There was a lot of amazing ideas in there, ideas I hope to use in the future, but that one really kind of centered me and realized, okay, gotta step back, gotta start over, gotta focus it in on, I think, the things that are not the sort of main pop culture understandings, right? So yeah. Marvel brings us the understanding of Loki and Thor and Anthony Hopkins. And I realized, like, look, people know that, but that's not what's going to get them into our world. What's going to get them into our world is really centering around Kratos and radiating out with stories that feel like you connect with these people, that it feels like you're hearing somebody recount a story from the bar the other day, but it really actually is a piece of mythology. It feels less than like a lecture, like a bit of an education, more like, oh, that's crazy, I wonder if I'm going to run into that person. That was the connection we really wanted people to have, so it never felt like you were overwhelmed or you hadn't studied the night before.
I feel like he's leading into a discussion of Mimir, because
hanging
like
from
that's
Kratos'
exactly
belt.
what I was setting up.
Yeah.
Because he really was sort of giving me all those bits and pieces, like the tantalizing dark mythology that I really didn't know a whole lot about, and that wasn't the focus of the game. Like, how did you balance his character? Because it was one of the most fascinating pieces of the game, because everywhere I was going, I was passively learning something.
Yeah, he ballooned up a lot, because initially, when we talked about Mimir, he was going to be the disembodied head that would be in a bag. Kratos would have this little fanny pack, and then the magical fanny pack that held everything.
And then Senua's Sacrifice came out.
Right. It was interesting because we had gotten farther down the road. Like, I swear, they are amazing over there, but I was utterly convinced they had our office bugged. Dang. Because the number of times I was like, I'd watch one of those dev diaries, because I watched every single one of those as they came out, and I'd come out of my office screaming, like, who's talking to Tamim? Right? Just so frustrated, because I was like, how did they know about this? They're doing a no-cut camera now? What's wrong? Because our game was taking so long, I felt like everything's going to be done. By the time we get this thing finished, everyone else will have already done all these cool ideas. But Mimir was in the bag, and then we would pull him out occasionally, just a few times for a conversation. But then I realized, like, what would be awesome is if he was hanging on his belt, and if you were to stand still, you'd be seeing this disembodied head kind of blinking and looking around. I was like, I think this is an opportunity. We're sort of missing something. But I knew if I just sprung it on people, if I just said, hey, we're going to have the talking head, he's going to hang from there, people would get very upset. Oh, it's going to be comical, it's not going to work. So I just started mentioning it in reviews every once in a while. I was like, yeah, I wonder if his head hanging off the belt would be kind of cool. You know what, let's focus on this thing, just every once in a while throwing in a conversation until I finally just said, by the way, Mimir's head's going to be hanging off your belt, and he's going to tell you stories, and we're going to rely on him telling you stories throughout, right? We have been doing all this research, seeing that there's so much fantastic mythology, but he's the perfect guy to say, oh, I know this person, right? He gives you his personal sort of opinion.
But she's helped us a lot.
She lied.
Some people value their privacy. Best not to judge, brother.
When I require your council head, I will ask.
Fair enough.
It makes it feel, again, less like I'm trying to remember this, because some of these names are really hard to pronounce. Like, we tried to stay true to the names of characters and places, but playtest kept yielding the result of, like, I'm so confused by the location, right? Koningsgard or Virgard, when you see it written, is very intimidating with the umlauts. So we had to balance how much we could get into it and how much more could it just be like talking about a person he knew.
I absolutely love when you get into the boat, Mimir, you put his head on the bench next to Atreus. I thought that was great. I didn't even notice that at first. But did you know right away from the get-go when you sat down in, 2013 to start making this game that it was going to be Norse mythology?
No. I mean, my wife is Swedish, so I knew that there was a desire to kind of investigate that mythology. It was more about learning about her culture and their past, but I wanted to kind of get a little sliver of a lot of mythology. So when I came back, I started doing the Cliff Notes version of all these different mythologies, just to kind of get a flavor of what they were about. And Egyptian was always fascinating to me. It sort of had a geography problem of, if he's going to want to get away from his past, that's not far enough away, right? And there's also these great stories within there that, the pharaohs are kind of like the physical manifestations of the gods, right? That the gods, talking about the gods even walking the earth, they never really were doing that. A lot of it was the sort of living in other worlds. So there was some interesting stuff, but when I first read some of the Eddas, and these were translations of the Eddas, and I was just kind of delving in, not really going deep, I started seeing some of the sense of humor, right? Some of that weird, dry, and slightly dark and twisted sense of humor that the Scandinavians have. And that was what first started to attract me to it, to say, like, we're going to have a game that probably is going to be very long. We cannot be serious all the time. It has to have moments of levity, and the levity has to feel like it's rooted in the mythology, but also genuine, right? As opposed to playing for a gag, right? And we were very cognizant of that throughout to make sure we were not just trying to tell jokes.
That's a soul eater. If that kills us, that's it. No Valhalla, no hell, no afterlife, ever.
It does not attack.
Mom made them sound more dangerous than that.
Then do not drop your guard. Come.
As I kept circling around to the different mythology, I realized, like, there is an order in which we're probably going to go to each one of these, and reading about each one of them allowed me to understand this is probably a really good order, and the first one out is Norse myth. One, because choosing the location or the time period being the pre-migration, right, which is this massive expanse of time that we don't then have to commit to when this happened, but it's also the isolation. Right? Kratos and Atreus against the world. They are isolated, not a lot of friends, and the very few people that they interact with still feels like it's just monsters and these few people. And I think that's the fertile ground for character growth.
There's one scene later on in the game where you find that missing piece from that ruin. Was it Atreus was reading it? There was like, oh, there's a piece missing, and then it's the one depicting, I think, Tyr in the middle of. It's like the Greek symbol for, it's like the Omega something for war or whatever. So we were theorizing basically, like, is that kind of, like you said, like Norse was the first mythology you want to go to, but then you also see the Triskelion, and then you see the Eye of Horus. I might be butchering which these are. Is that an intent maybe down the road to build a larger universe outside of just Greek and Norse?
There is a connection to that. Its first goal was to show how Tyr connected to all of these other mythologies. Tyr was kind of the first god of war within the Norse realm. Kind of got screwed over by the gods, right? And sort of pushed aside, and Odin kind of took over in that respect. And we portrayed him as this interesting kind of like the more beloved god, the god who actually connected to other mythologies, other cultures, and was trying to unify and bring them together, but the kind of rabble-rousers of the Aesirs sort of ruined that. And there's these references in the mythology of actually having certain characters actually reference or interact with, say, the Roman gods, which I thought was always fascinating. That I don't know if it's simply a later translation, or even when the Christians started to move Norse mythology to away from paganism and more towards Christianity, that maybe they had folded some of these things in. But I always love that idea that on the planet, since the beginning of time, all these cultures are having their origin stories, right? And geography is separating all of them so that concurrently all these mythologies are going on, right? There isn't one that says, this is how everything was. It was, this is how this culture was brought up, and this culture was brought up in this way. And who knows if they were to crisscross and have some crazy Norse and Egyptian and Mayan Justice League of people.
Speaking of creation stories, I like that Freya's house is on the back of a turtle. Is that Native American myth kind of coming into it? Maybe that's what I first thought.
Well, that's cool. Actually, I would love to say, oh, that's
Intentional.
totally what we were doing there. But when we talked about the design of her house, I had said, look, I want to do something really cool here. I want when you go to Sanctuary Grove to feel like you're stepping into, what dreams may come kind of painting, right?
That's a very good point of reference. Yeah, because it definitely was that entirely surreal.
Just totally bursting with color and really a sense of hope that wasn't present in the previous franchises. And I think this idea that it wasn't coming in the beginning, but then the larger world starts to open up and you experience the fantastic, right? The movies of my youth that were sort of formative for me. Never Ending Story is one I reference all the time, which has the sense that, it is a storybook come to life and so much possibility. And I said, I would love it if she lived inside of a creature or something like that. And I know that's crazy because we were in heavy scoping at the time, so everything was too expensive and I needed to start trimming everything down because it was way too big and everyone was freaking out. And the art director at the time had actually said, all right, well, we'll take a look at this. I'll just bring some people in a room and we'll just talk and see what happens. I can't promise anything. The creature's a little crazy, they're freaking out on the schedule side. So then he comes back and says, all right, so there's something I want to pitch you and something I don't want to pitch you. And I know you're going to want me to pitch you the one I don't want to pitch you, but let me pitch you this other stuff, and then we'll go to the thing I don't want to pitch you, and we can't afford it, so, don't fall in love with it. And I was like, that is the worst pitch ever, because that's all I'm going to care about at this point. So he showed me a couple of the drawings that they did when they were in the room talking. I was like, oh, that's cool, this is nice, this is all right. And they said, all right, and then I'll just tell you the thing that seemed to be the one resonating in the room, but we totally can't do it, is that maybe her house is underneath a turtle. And I was like, it's happening.
Yeah.
Like this is the magic moment. Let's remember this because it's a turtle. It's a turtle. It's happening. And he's just like, damn it. So then I got into lots of arguments with the producers and begged and pleaded and agreed to cut some other stuff, which I didn't later. I always do that. I always make the promise that, okay, if I do this, then I promise I will get rid of something at a later date. Let's talk about it next week. And then I delay the meeting and suddenly forget or say, you know what, I just have to think about it a little bit longer. I really do feel like I just tricked everybody to make this game as big as it was. But, that to me was an amazing moment. That was when a bunch of really talented artists go into a room and just let their imaginations run wild. And I think you guys...
Is this the turtle's name?
Yeah. You guys were the ones that assigned Charlie as the name for Atreus.
Someone mentioned that to me this morning because you were coming in, and I was like, that's not real. That never happened.
And we found that video of you doing the interview. I think it was next to Kratos' voice actor, and you were saying, I don't know where GameSpot got that. I don't know where we got it either.
And I can only imagine, does the son have a name, by the way?
GameSpot says it's Charlie.
Charlie.
I don't know where that came from.
That's fun.
Charlie, right? Did you leak that?
I did.
I mean, you had a good phrase here, but leaking Charlie?
I know.
Come on.
I actually said
that was
Charles,
supposed to be a
but
secret. It's
yeah.
very Norse, Charlie. It's an old, ancient Norse, Charlie.
We rewatched the video, listening super close this morning. We couldn't find anything.
Atreus.
I was talking to everybody. I was like, did I mention this? Because it's entirely possible I made some dumb joke that been misinterpreted or something like that. But then they were like, he has a son and his name is Charlie. And honestly, it was the funniest thing. We thought it was rad. And so I was like, this is going in the game at some point. And the writers just came up with an idea and they said, we're not going to tell you. We're going to put it in. And I found it in a playthrough. And I nearly fell off the couch while I was playing. I was like, this is the greatest implementation of that ever.
That article is still up with the name Charlie in it.
4 times.
And I refuse to change it. Four times.
Don't go back and change it.
I don't.
Come on.
No, I don't.
No. We're not putting
It's a
flashlights
piece of
in the
history.
soldiers' hands here. That's part of history, man.
How's it going, Charlie? Is your witch friend here?
What is that name?
That's what he told me it was. Or what it sounded like in my head, anyway. Charlie.
Did you know from the beginning, or was it something that came out of the process, that Atreus would be Loki?
I really wish we could say that from the beginning that was the plan, but it was not. Matt Sophos and Rich Gobert, the 2 writers that I'm working with on this, brilliant writers that wrote Lost Planet 3, absolutely underrated story in that game. It's so freaking good. But they had come into my office one day and said they had an idea and they wanted to pitch it. I was like, all right, cool. And their pitch was verbatim the lines that were used in the game. That's how solid it was. It's like, yeah, he'd be recounting the story of looking at the mural and say he understands all of this stuff. He said, but what was weird is he didn't understand they kept getting his name wrong in the mural. They kept calling him Loki, and he even said it the way that Sonny ends up saying it, Loki. And I was just like, oh, you guys suck. I wish I came up with that idea. It's so good. I'm totally going to take credit for that. No, it's utterly like just that aha moment of, I knew in the beginning that part of this story is about identity, right? And the identity lens that I was looking at it was, how much of ourselves do we show our children, right? How much of our true selves do we show, and how much do we try to portray the superhero that is without fault, right? And it's very hard to show the negatives. It's very hard to show that we're not perfect and we make mistakes and we've done dumb things in our past because we feel it might undermine our sort of authority, I guess, with our children. But there is an amazing part of this, the part that sort of blossomed right in that moment, which was, we don't often get a chance to choose our identity, right? We get that moment when you go to a new school, when you go to college, where you get to reinvent yourself, where nobody knows you, and you get to be who you wished you were, right? But this idea of going through the entire game and being referred to as Atreus and actually sort of bonding with his father and having these breakthrough moments and this sort of coming-of-age tale, and then realizing that his name could have been Loki, and that it is a name that she passed on and wanted him to learn, but only at that moment. Only at the moment at the end when he'd gone through all of this stuff, so that he can then, probably not in that moment, but in the future, start wondering if that is a part of himself he wants to take on, and if that is maybe truly who he is, right? It is that, do you take the last name, or do you keep your sort of maiden name? And then how does the child feel about the connection to that maiden name versus the sort of taken last name concept? And I think this one's even more extreme because of how electrically charged the name Loki is, and how he is connected to so much more. And while he may not have done any of those things, he might start learning about some of those things. So it's a really cool thing that was born of the organic process of just working with awesome people, right? And I think that's why I absolutely love making games with teams, because other people's perspectives make things so much better.
Oh, it resulted in a fantastic game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, we're so proud of this thing, and seriously, that was a beautiful review, by the way. So I think it was very amazing.
I appreciate that. But your game was the one that born it. So born it? That's a word.
Born it. You heard it here.